I decided it was time for a change, and I moved to a role that was actually not right for me, which is important as well. I think people don't talk often about the things that don't go like right and the choices that are made. Something that I really value is like, people who've been committed to somewhere and have seen the challenges and the journeys and have worked across different parts of the business to kind of make something, take it from day one to where it is now. I'm the person that gets the calls from the marketing teams when the brand has moved down 3 spaces saying like, why, I've got my company earnings call tomorrow. But I'm also the person that is like, approached when people want to put it in their board packs to investors. Strongly branded organizations outperform the market always.
Amazing, guys. Thank you so much for coming to this 180 Creative Mixer. Also Voices of the Culture as well. My name is Kevin. I've been in marketing for around close to 10 years now. Worked in a handful of companies. Lyst, how I know Katy, which is a global fashion marketplace. Heat, which is a fashion shopping platform as well. And now currently I'm the head of growth at a contemporary art company called Drool, which works with emerging artists. With that though, I also have started operating and running Voices of the Culture. Voices of the Culture is something that I kind of came up with around 6 months ago. It's something that I wish I had when I was a student in university. I've always loved being in brand marketing and kind of digital marketing in general, and just wanted to know who were the people that were dictating the brands that we love, the fashion that we love. Who were those movers and shakers behind the scenes, those brand marketers, those CMOs, and really understanding what were the career trajectory and what did it take to get there, but then also people who are prominent voices within their space as well, and what were their thoughts and ideas around everything that they kind of led with as well. So which kind of brought me to this. I'm also here with Katy Lubin, who at one point was my boss, a very good boss as well, one of my favorite.
Thank you.
Katy is the Global VP of Brand at Lyst. She's been there for close to a decade now, previously working with a handful of companies, which we'll touch on in a little bit. British Fashion Council, PR agencies, Net-a-Porter, so it has a really amazing perspective on luxury fashion and brand in general. So really good to touch into everything that she's worked on and her viewpoint on that as well. So Katy, I guess I don't know if you want to do a little bit intro about yourself, or did I kind of cover everything?
I think that was great.
Yeah.
I just liked being Kev's boss the best, basically. So that was highlight number 1.
So yeah, with that, Katy, obviously this being Voice of the Culture, what is culture to you?
I think you can kind of see it as sort of a bit of a framework that we try to layer over the stories and the interactions that define our everyday experience. It's kind of a nebulous term, and it can be used in everything from your company culture to the culture of an industry to, cultural context and perspective. And I think it's a term that gets thrown around a lot, and it means different things to different people. But it's that normally happens to words when they're important. And so I think it's great that more and more we're having discussions about what culture means to us and how it impacts and intertwines with our daily life more and more.
I think what's really interesting with that as well is for me, growing up, I had a really focus on American culture, basketball, hip hop. And I remember there's this advert that I saw close to 15 years ago, which has, it's a Reebok ad with a basketball player called Allen Iverson and a rapper called Jadakiss. And they did an ad, and it was this first combination of two cultures coming together, this streetwear culture, hip hop culture, merging with basketball. And for the first time, I felt seen. I felt like this was something that really embodies everything that I love and everything that I'm really interested in as well. And that it was an advert which kind of mixed two influential cultures together. With yourself, kind of growing up in North London and just in London in general, what were some of the influential cultures that you were raised on that really shaped who you are as a person, but also who you are as a brand marketer as well?
Yeah, I grew up in Camden Town. I still live very near to Camden Town now. Camden is this insane melting pot of fashion and music and style and commerce. And so I think I got very kind of used to just seeing everything around me, from punks to goths to ravers to, Amy Winehouse and indie sleaze and kind of the hipsters. And so just seeing that mix all around and trying to kind of connect the dots of, Japanese Lolita to vintage stores and like that big diversity of how people were dressing and expressing themselves all the time on my kind of doorstep was a real like crazy access to that world of fashion and how kind of fun it can be. And I think it's no surprise that Camden's something like the #2 tourist destination in London now. And, it's changed a lot over the years since I've been living there. It's become a lot more sort of, commercial and gentrified. And a lot of the big chains have moved in because of that, authenticity and that community and culture that it once stood for. So I think that was key in sort of shaping that. Sport, like you, I played a lot of sport when I was growing up. And I think especially now, this cultural intersection of sport and fashion is bigger than it's ever been before. I mean, in general, I think it's really hard to sort of pigeonhole culture into one space. Like, I remember my grandma used to say she would read a fashion magazine when she went to the hairdressers, and that would be her interaction with fashion. Now, fashion is everywhere. It's in, the athletes themselves having their own fashion brands. So I think it's more and more like hard to pinpoint these moments that are cultural or crossing over or intersecting with each other, because really the way that it's fragmented and evolved over the time has meant that we're just bombarded by this stuff all the time. And it's really interesting now, getting into my mid-30s, to see these cultural moments that were formative growing up coming back around, whether that's through fashion trends or through the artists. I recently made my team sit down and watch the Usher Super Bowl halftime show on the Monday after that went on. And I was like, I can't believe you didn't know these songs from version 1. Like, this is what I lived through. And now this is kind of non-ironically coming back around in fashion is fantastic. But it's amazing to watch that cycle and see how that moves. And I'm fascinated by why that happens and what it represents.
Yeah, that's interesting. I remember you told me close to 8 years ago or something around. There was this resurgence, maybe not 8 years ago, but there was a resurgence of Nike TNs and Air Maxes coming back, especially like Skepta when he did Shutdown, the video, and that kind of like aesthetic came back again. And then you're telling me the Nike TNs were called 110s.
Yeah, did no one else used to call them 110s? Because they cost £110. Like, that was what they were called. And then I didn't realize that they had another name. But yeah, it's just everyone brings their own perspective and their own recollections to the different products and the different moments that come back around in fashion. And I think as the access to information and knowledge around fashion has democratized in such a brilliant way, you're starting to hear more and more people's unique takes on why things are popular or why they're interesting or why they're not great. And that's really adding to the conversation at this point.
Yeah, I agree. It'll be really great to talk about your career journey, just kind of where you started from and how did you end up becoming a global VP of brand. I think that's really good. Sometimes I kind of go to certain talks or I see certain things and the feedback can be a little bit vague sometimes, or those steps to get there can be a little bit vague. So for yourself, I guess one side is, what were kind of the pivotal steps and challenges that you had to, kind of those essential moments that kind of redefine your career journey, and then also, what does it take to be a global VP of brand as well?
Ooh. So I think my career has kind of evolved and sort of moved along this sort of e-commerce online journey as that space has really evolved. And so by nature of the timing of me getting into the industry, the opportunities available to me have shifted all the time. And so that's one piece of advice I give to everyone, is not try to pigeonhole yourself too early in that journey to figure out what works for you, because the job that you're doing now, it might not exist in 5 years' time, but there might be something incredible that's coming along that you're kind of lining yourself up for. And that's sort of what happened to me, really. I started out of uni. I was really interested in doing events because I just thought it was fun to do parties and to meet people. And I think that's the same for a lot of people getting into the industry. And I worked with this amazing woman who was a kind of freelance events production manager. And I was kind of helping with all sorts of stuff, from guest lists to, planning and production. And she was like, what you're doing is you should go into PR. And I was like, is this PR? This is great. This is just throwing parties and hanging out with people and talking to people. And she was like, yeah. So she basically gave me the intro to this very small boutique agency. where I worked as a kind of junior, exec, working across all sorts of different types of brands, from Debenhams, like RIP, to Mango, to kind of niche brands like Oliver People's glasses. And just I think those early stages of, like literally working in a cupboard, steaming clothes, sending samples, returning, like, it's easy to look back on that and be like, oh, that was so fun and important. But I really think it was. And some of the relationships and the friendships that I made in that point of my life, not just have they become lifelong friends, but they've become some of my most valuable contacts in the industry as everyone evolves and moves up the ladder together. So I think those early stages, they were foundational in setting me up for everything that came afterwards. I got the opportunity, I was really interested in menswear, actually, at that point, from working across the men's and women's brands. I just really loved the culture of it. I sort of found the people more fun and friendlier and just like a little bit less, more inviting and welcoming. And Mr. Porter, the men's side of Net-a-Porter, was just setting itself up at that time. And so I interviewed for a role there, which was like at the start of that company's journey. And it was a really great moment to join the team because, they were backed by the might of Net-a-Porter at that point. So they were really well resourced and had like a lot of learnings to build on from what had worked on the women's side. But also we're really trying to do something different in the men's space, talking to a different audience, positioning the brand differently, working with different kinds of retailers to get, products onto the platform, doing storytelling and editorial really differently. So it was amazing to be part of a small team at the beginning of that journey for that company. And actually, I think that's something that I've always been quite excited about, is being there at the start of things and setting companies up and sort of looking for growth at that early stage. I was there for quite a long time, like 4 years, like really grow with the company. And then I decided it was time for a change, and I moved to a role that was actually not right for me, which is important as well. I think people don't talk often about the things that don't go like right and the choices that are made. I went to the British Fashion Council, just literally down the road at Somerset House, and it's a cultural institution. It was like working for a council, any kind of council, having come from this culture of innovation ultimately, and being online and digital expertise, it wasn't quite right fit for me at that moment. So I didn't last long there, really. I wasn't right for them, it wasn't right for me. And then through someone that I'd worked with at Net-a-Porter before, again, the value of just keeping in touch with really good people along the way, heard about this startup, as it was at that point, called Lyst, that was trying to kind of aggregate all of the different online platforms into one place for a kind of seamless experience for the user. And just, was introduced to the founder, thought he was a really inspiring guy, had a really clear vision and a mission for something that, I hadn't seen done in a convincing way before. And that was close to a decade ago. And so I think it's rare to be in a job for 10 years, at, this point. But I love the loyalty and the journey that comes from being involved for a long time and from seeing something through. When I interview people or I talk to people about their careers, it's something that I really value, is people who've been committed to somewhere and have seen the challenges and the journeys and have worked across different parts of the business to kind of make something, take it from day one to where it is now. And I think, going back to your question of what are the key points that stand out, the online space, I'm kind of a chronically online person. I'm really interested in what's happening there and how it changes, evolves all the time. And fashion, but connected to sort of broader cultural points. Working across multiple brands at once has really been what's worked for me.
Yeah, I think that's really, really interesting. I think it's interesting what you said around the aspects of the role that you're doing now might not even exist in the next 5 years, or there might be a different aspect of it. That's even for myself. When I joined Lyst, that was my first proper job out of uni. I came in as a copywriter because I had an English degree and I wanted to I wanted to write for the BBC. That dream didn't come true. I wanted to write on EastEnders, but my mom just loved it.
You can still make it happen, good.
I can still write for EastEnders one day. But then I kind of came through that way, and that was when blog posts and everything at that side of within that space was like really, really huge. And now my day-to-day is working within an element of being really data-led, but also like being really creative as well. That's not something, I was more like the analytical side of marketing. I was working with, now I work with creators on a day-to-day and thinking of concept of how to convey the message. It's kind of been this hybrid of brand/performance marketing as well. What's your day-to-day? How's that changed from like kind of where you started even at Lyst versus right now?
Oh my God, so much. Every day to day is different. There's no like one set day to day for me. So a big part of my role at the moment is like Lyst works with 17,000 different brands and stores. And a lot of my role is about kind of building and maintaining relationships with marketing leaders at some of the brands on our platform. So I will, go to them to understand their marketing priorities and their calendars for the year to really understand how we as a partner to them at Lyst can help with those, help support their businesses, understand their challenges and feed that back to the team in London in terms of like what product features do we need to make? Like what's not working for them in their product experience? What marketing stories are they trying to tell? And how is the best way to actually support that? Like, okay, what are we seeing in the data and how is that different than what they're trying to do with their strategy? And is that actually the right path for them? Or can we feed them some data that helps validate that or point them, in the different direction? And Lyst is a really trusted ally to a lot of the most powerful, hottest brands in fashion because it's a really a win-win, business model. We send them traffic, and brands customers can transact often on their own e-commerce, and so it's a relationship that is really interesting because brands can be very honest and transparent with us in conversations and with me. And I feel very privileged to have the ear of some of the, the top CMOs and leaders in the fashion marketing space and to be able to like sort of hear and compare what I'm hearing across lots of different brands in the space, not just the luxury players, the brands in the Lyst Index, but also, the sports brands, the contemporary labels, because we work with a whole range of different brands and stores across the spectrum. And so that's what keeps the role sort of interesting and different for me actually, is there's always a different challenge.
Yeah, one thing that kind of famously now known for is you developed the Lyst Index, which close to just half a decade, around 6 years ago. For those that know, the Lyst Index is a data-led review of the hottest products and the hottest brands every quarter. And it's kind of become this like culture phenomenon within, I guess, the business of fashion. You have CMOs, CEOs talking about it, making sure, where do they rank, kind of speak a little bit on that, but then also speak on kind of what inspired that as well.
Yeah, it's nuts to see how this evolved over the last 6 years. It's amazing. And yeah, I guess 6 years ago, about 60% of the team at Lyst is data scientists and engineers who, work with the analytics every day, looking at the stats around what people are searching for and shopping for. And I sort of tasked that team 6 years ago to say, can we build a formula that names and ranks the hottest brands in fashion? And I wanted this to be something very different than what you could see from a kind of traditional publisher where an editor would choose based off their opinion, these are the things that we think are interesting, or these are the advertisers that have paid us this month to say that these are the things that are interesting. It had to be objectively grounded in something real. And so we sat down to figure out like what should that formula include. And what we knew is that if we just looked at, pure search and sales data on the platform, that was great, but it would give us the biggest, and maybe the biggest brands in fashion wouldn't actually change that much quarter on quarter, so it wouldn't be the most interesting story. So to get to the hottest, we needed to include some sort of measure of kind of talkability and buzz, which is where social media metrics came into the mix. And so what we have now, and we don't reveal the secret source of the formula and the algorithm that mixes it, but is a blend of those three factors. So like search, sales, and social media ultimately. And I was concerned when we launched it that there might not be enough movement or change to do this every 3 months to keep it interesting. But actually what you see is that there's a ton of movement. Like the brands move and change all the time. And I think its power has been in its consistency. It's really earned the recognition and the respect of the industry by doing this same activation every 3 months. And I think when you're in a marketing role, it's tempting to be, everyone's excited by the big shiny thing or the big campaign, like the one moment that you build up to all year that you're going to invest a ton of your budget and your planning and your resource into this one silver bullet activation. But really this sort of drumbeat of consistently showing up in the same way in this sort of credible, notable, recognizable moment every 3 months has been really powerful for our brand. And I would encourage everyone to think about sort of franchises in that sense. Like, how can you give something the time to build? Because certainly it wasn't a smash hit immediately. We actually partnered with the Business of Fashion when we first launched it to ensure that it got that reach and that credibility. And then we kind of took it back because we were like, wait a minute, we can do this on our own. Just sticking to it over the years has been really valuable. And now, I hear it from the brands all the time. It's like a key metric for them that they look at in terms of their performance in the market, because they don't get that kind of objectivity around what the customer actually wants from any other place. So it's an amazing thing to work on. It's a real privilege, but also it can be a nightmare. I'm the person that gets the calls from the marketing teams when the brand has moved down 3 spaces saying like, why, I've got my company earnings call tomorrow. But I'm also the person that is like, approached when people want to put it in their board packs to investors, and like when they're validating which creative director to go on. And it's amazing to see it referenced in the business press to the TikToks, right? Like the broad sweep of people who see it as this definitive resource and engage with it and add their opinions to it has really helped it fly. And so it's an amazing, powerful brand asset for us at Lyst.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think I've even seen it cut through to like mainstream as well. Like I saw it on a podcast that has nothing to do with fashion.
Yeah, it's been shared by Kim Kardashian. Yeah. Like, it's kind of crazy. Like when you get something that is, you lose control of it slightly in a good way. And then I think that's how you know that something's really taking off, where, we can go back to the team and be like, the creative directors are sharing it on their own accounts, as well as the brands posting it on their LinkedIn through their corporate comms teams, as well as the customers who are deciding whether to buy the bag, like, pointing to the fact that it's been referenced there as like the reason that they got it. And it has a really interesting impact, not just on the sort of press and earned media space, but on the products that are listed themselves, because the products that are included as the hottest products are already quite big. But then if it's ventured again, you get this sort of sustaining pattern of like the spike again of people wanting that because it's been called out. So it's it's just a really interesting campaign to work on every 3 months.
I mean, going on to kind of when you build this is based off of data. Is there kind of like any emerging spaces that you feel like can have the same impact now? I'm thinking around AI or anything like that. Anything that can, not to remake the Lyst Index, but something that you can leverage again to really connect that unusual kind of aspects and then combine it with fashion.
Yeah, I mean, I think like we think about the transformative power of AI for our business all the time at the moment, right? Like I said, I work with a ton of data scientists and engineers, and we were quite early adopters of this technology. Like when you work at the scale that we do, 200 million shoppers, 17,000 brands, like you have to use machine learning to automate some of those processes and to look at things at scale. And, we were like early in the game of building our own large language programs and like looking at kind of, the best ways to use that technology for efficiencies within the product. But increasingly, I think, customer, like understanding of the customer and taste through data is becoming something that is just getting more and more fascinating to dive into, because, fashion is so nuanced. It's so subjective. It's really hard. Like if you've ever seen one of those, demographic or archetype slides from a retailer where they go like, Katy is 20 to 30 and she lives in New York and she spends $200 to $300, and you're like, this is not a real person. They might be this person now, but they're not going to be that person in 3 months' time. I see it a little bit like horoscopes, where you used to have like your 12 horoscopes and you read your little paragraph and you were one of those people. And then as people got more and more into that space, any horoscope people in the room? People like horoscopes? Yeah. As people got more and more into that, it was like, oh, I'm this sign, but I'm rising this, and maybe I'm looking at this, and you got a little bit more depth to your kind of personal profile. And then people were like, oh, I've got a chart. I've got my birth chart. I was born on this day at this moment. And so I know all of this stuff about me, and that is fixed to who I am as a person. But fashion is like that, except that chart moves all the time, because in one day you're feeling like that and you're certainly this way, but you're going to be feeling totally different tomorrow. And that can be because of the weather. It can be because you've changed body shape. It can be because you're going into a new job. So you're constantly shifting and reframing the priorities that, you know, inform your shopping decisions in fashion. And so it's really hard to paint an accurate picture of the customer now in terms of just data. And so, you know, looking more and more at the different signals together is giving us a better, clearer, more accurate understanding of how to, you know, predict the needs and wants of that shopper. And so I think when it comes to like, how do we make features and products out of that? The Lyst Index is fantastic, but it's one sort of subset. It talks to the luxury brands, really. You know, I can foresee a future where you have that for every element, you know, every element of the different kinds of brands that are out there. You know, I think Spotify's Wrapped at the end of the year is a fantastic example where it's a brand asset and people love to see what their top songs are. But I think it's fun because it tells you something about your identity and your personality and who you were that year. But almost like you want to see your Spotify Wrapped compared to the last 10 years and the next 10 years to see how you evolve as a person. And that's what AI gives us, is just that capability to do that at a scale that was unimaginable before.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like, you know, the way we style and dress up is so nuanced. Like, I would hate to see a picture of myself 10 years ago and the stuff that I chose to wear back then.
I mean, you got to own it, right? I think like there's... that is really comes back to this idea of culture and fashion being about identity and clothing being about self-expression. And I think like fashion as a term is really about capturing that in one moment in time right now, whereas style is kind of that over time expressed as a continuum. And so I think like you might have these different phases where you look back and go like, oh, that's not in fashion now, or I feel ashamed of that thing that I wore, but they all shape this evolution of your style over time. So you got to own it.
I'm going to own that Henley top that I bought from Abercrombie & Fitch.
I liked your prep phase, Kev. I think you could bring that back.
I went through a very weird... I think I wore a suit like randomly, and like for like Lyst is a startup and you don't wear suits, and I was trying to make suits happen for like 2 weeks, and everyone's like, Kev, stop wearing suits to work. You look ridiculous. I would love to talk about, obviously we're now like kind of in an economic downturn, and I guess the demand for luxury has softened a bit. And I'm someone who comes from like a performance marketing background, so like being super data led. But in the past few years, I've kind of just like really understood like the power of brand and building a brand and how important that is. Can you just speak on like why is it so important to invest in brand, even when everything points towards don't invest in brand, and you have senior leadership saying we don't have a budget for brand?
Yeah, I feel very strongly about this. You know, strongly branded organizations outperform the market always. And by strongly branded, I don't mean a big logo. I mean clearly positioned, easily understood, and memorable. And the power to lift all boats that comes from investing in that strategic work up front and then delivering on it consistency is, you know, a longer term horizon way of thinking. It's not about instant return on investment in the way that performance marketing is. And it can be really hard to pull that needle out if you're in a company that is, you know, digitally focused or a D2C brand, and that's how you've sustained and grown over the last few years. But I think as anyone who works in that space will know, like that's getting increasingly harder, increasingly more expensive and competitive to justify as a long-term strategic plan for your company. And so at some point, you've got to have that conversation where you go like, are we ready to turn this on, like turn brand on, and then are we ready to kind of turn it up? And that's a conversation that I've had many times in my Lyst history. Lyst is an incredible company full of the smartest, most analytical, you know, data-driven people that you will know. And it's not enough to go into a boardroom with those people and say like, I've got a vision for a billboard, and, you know, we're going to paint a bus and we're going to partner with these guys and it's going to be really cool and it just feels right. I think you can do that if you're a creative director at Louis Vuitton, but you can't if you're, you know, in this climate, in this market right now, and every dollar counts. And so instead, I think it's about, you know, putting really clear parameters around the bets that you're trying to make and proving out what you're trying to say with, you know, impactful tests ultimately. And if you're working with smaller budgets, which also is like very much the way that I've always worked at Lyst, like we are very pragmatic, we're super impact focused. You've got to, prove the value of any investment before you get it and then be able to double down. And honestly, I think it's a smart way to work. I think that beautiful constraint is the best way to work at this moment in time. It forces you to be really strategic, but also really creative in how you can use that budget the best. You've got to put some parameters around how you're spending on brand. It's not enough to have an idea. You have to be really clear on the brief, like who am I talking to? What am I trying to get them to do and why? What's the key metric that I'm trying to move? If you've not got much to spend, ring fence it. Like pick a market or a city or pick a moment in the calendar. Maybe Q4 is historically like really weak for you, or maybe Q3 is amazing and you want to push the ceiling on the golden quarter, or you want to try and boost it in a moment where there isn't much else going on, and you'll be able to really clearly attribute the success of that campaign to that activity that you're doing. Trying to isolate that investment is really important. And the other way to do it is to sort of really, and this is quite hard depending on your product and your audience, but to kind of isolate a subset of your existing audience to say, can we oversteer towards these people, these customers, create something for them, put this in, this space where we know these people are going to be. I think anyone in this climate who is willing to just, commit to brand with no sense of like how we track that or how we think about that long term, it's kind of misguided. It's like not a smart way to work, but you've got to base it in this fundamental belief that brand lifts all boats. And what you're trying to move away from is the idea of brand marketing as a cost center, like a team that just takes this money and it goes, to it being a profit center for your company, it being an asset that delivers above its weight actually and helps all of your other marketing investments work harder. And it's a really hard shift to go on if you're not in a leadership team that has that conviction, or if you haven't done the strategic work up front about what your brand is trying to say and who you're trying to say it to, then that's the other thing that can make it fail. But I would say like invest in brand strategy is like advice number one, and then be really, really clear on the tests that you do when within that brand strategy is advice number two. And then once you've got that validation, the whole conversation becomes easier because it's grounded in something real. And then from then on, it's easier to go, okay, we go 10x here, or we've done this market, let's do this market too, or we do it all quarters. But it's really challenging in this moment to have that. But I think you've just got to ground it in real learnings and optimize the activity for learnings rather than for conversion.
I think also thinking like holistically around just brands in general. What brands, I feel like you've been in lots of meetings with like a handful of brands. What do you think makes like those brands succeed from a team basis? What is kind of that formula for, you can tell that brand's killing it because of X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think you can sort of feel it. Like I was just saying before we came on, I've been lucky to do this sort of roadshow of many of the sort of like key players in Milan and Paris over the last few months. And you go into a meeting with these teams, and from the get, you can feel if the whole room is energized and is there and is contributing to the conversation, or if it's more of that old school culture where you've got a bit more of a sort of feared CMO coming in and everyone suddenly quietens down and looks at their laptop and isn't taking part. And often it's the brands where everyone is excited to contribute and say something that are doing the best. And it's the teams that have more diversity in the room in terms of age, in terms of background, in terms of like thought. It just feels like those are the brands that are more culturally relevant and that have something to say and have an opinion in those meetings. And that translates in the performance of those brands, certainly within our platform, which is, it's a really interesting dynamic, but I think you can feel where the company culture translates into the culture of the brand and what they put out into the world.
Shout out the cool brands, the ones that you think are killing it.
Okay, the ones I'll tell you the ones I think are killing it. Loewe, Miu Miu. They're literally meeting rooms that I've been in and I've been like, everyone loves working here, and you can feel it. Here on home soil, I've just had some really great meetings recently with sort of smaller, emerging designers and brands who are not like killing it financially yet, but are doing really interesting things. And I think it just comes back to this idea that you've got to back yourself in this space, and if you can get in that room and convince everyone that you have not just the creative vision, but the energy to see it through, then there's always space for new voices in fashion, for new players in the scene. So it's that's what keeps it fresh and interesting, actually. And that's why you see this revolving door of talent at the bigger brands as they're trying to leverage the kind of new players coming up through the scene. I was at Ferragamo in Milan recently with Maximilian Davis, sort of their, new creative director, and he's bringing this incredible fresh energy to their team and perspective, and everyone is like lifted by it. You can see everyone's super excited about the new stuff, and it's like, sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't, but you got to keep trying new things.
I'm proud to say I come from, I guess, the school of Katy Lubin. Working with you for so many years. There's something that I kind of wish I had at uni in terms of, actual like these kind of discussions and being someone that can really speak on these facts and everything, and know what I was getting myself into as well. What is kind of like the core fundamental skill sets that someone needs to have to be on Katy's team, or maybe just thinking broadly, just be on a VP of brands team as well? What are kind of the skill sets that they need?
I look for, bringing it back to, there's sort of behaviors and there's kind of skills, right? And they cross over a lot. But when I think about like the real star talents, including Kev, who've been in my teams over the years, like there's probably a few things that kind of group together across them. I like people who really take ownership of a problem and come at me with, sure, this thing's happened, it's terrible, but they've got a solution and they're accountable for, trying to see that through. I really value people who just get stuck in, who aren't, this is my role and this is where the boundary is, but actually they're willing to jump in and try new things, because for sure, almost everyone I've ever hired has come in for one role, but that role has evolved over time. And if you're not willing to contribute to the team and try new stuff and take on new skills, then Lyst is probably not the place for you, and my team is probably not the place for you. As a sort of massive observer of the culture now, I really appreciate people who are participating in the culture. And if I look at the makeup of my team right now, I see that all the time. Not just sort of, big on social media. It's not about, having a big personal brand online, but people who are passionate about different elements of the space, whether they've got their own brands or they're, I've got one girl who's making these incredible bows out of satin, and with this coquette trend, it's really taken off for her. I've got another guy who sells vintage 90s tour merch on resale platforms, and everyone brings their own unique perspective and talents to their role every day. And I think just that taking part and having opinions and getting stuck in is really important, because it energizes me. I want to work with different age groups, different kinds of people, different backgrounds, and because otherwise, how are we all going to stay in touch and stay up to date, but also grow and learn together? So I think that's. I also think just a sort of energy, we've worked together. It's hard. At Lyst, we're doing hard things all the time. It's really quite a high pressure environment. We've got aggressive targets to hit. It's a high performance workplace for sure. And to thrive in that environment, you need to have fun along the way. I don't want anyone to burn out. And that's so far from how we even think about operating, that really I want someone who can just bring good vibes. And that is hugely important to me and my team, that there's an energy and a vibe, and that we can all sort of have fun and switch off and take that time together to enjoy working together, because that is really what breeds good collaboration and true teamwork, is that when it's fun, it's great and we're all having a good time, but when it's hard, you're there for those other people and you support them. And people have hard days at work. Not everyone can show up being sunny and smiling positive every single day of the life, because life gets in the way. But ultimately, if you've built that trust through having that good relationship ongoing, that's when you see people support each other in the team, and people thrilled for the success of other team members and lifting each other up and recognizing the achievements and spotlighting the successes of other people in the team. And I think when the whole team grows together, that's when it becomes most powerful. And I'm proud that a lot of my team has been with me for a lot of the 10 years that I've been at Lyst. I think it says something about the culture that we've built, that everyone's still there, still growing, still learning, still trying new things, still like taking on projects that we're terrified by all the time, still like pushing ourselves into spaces where we're like, I literally have no idea what I'm doing all the time, asking each other for advice, asking for feedback, just being honest and open, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. I feel like you've really encouraged side hustles or people that are like go-getters in their own space, as long as they kind of bring it back to Lyst as well. Is that something that you want to encourage, like just moving forward and always ongoing?
Yeah, I think it's like, you know, that sort of cliche of like bring your whole self to your work. Like, I don't think work should be your whole self, right? And so like you should have your thing that you're passionate and driven by and a purpose. But I'm aware that like my role of, you know, job description is probably not going to neatly encapsulate all that is to me as a human being. And so the more stuff you can, you know, fill your cup up with outside of the day-to-day that helps you be a happier, more, you know, well-rested, more energized, creatively inspired person, the better. And if you can bring that into the team to show people interesting stuff that they might not have seen or different perspectives or different podcasts you've heard, then all the better. And we try and do a lot of that kind of just sharing of interesting reference points and stuff that we've seen and heard, because it just keeps everyone feeling, you know, open to new possibilities.
I want to switch gears like a little bit. Kind of one of my few final questions is like this future of like creator-led marketing. We're now kind of in a space where individuals are actually bigger than brands themselves. So individuals, I think, are like people like Melissa's Wardrobe or something like that, who can literally tell you the products to buy, products not to buy, the products to boycott. What's kind of like your vision of the future of that, and how do you think brands should work with these individuals and kind of view them as brands with themselves and not, here's this freelance that we're just going to invoice something to or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there has always been like influencers of some sort in the culture, like arbiters of taste, whether that channel or, you know, the type of voice has changed over time, and there will always continue to be people shaping opinion and helping to kind of guide people in making recommended, you know, choices, especially in fashion, where you know, it's really inspiring to see people who just look great. I do think the nature of that influence has shifted a lot, and it's different to different people. Like there's like 5-6 different addressable audiences in fashion now. You know, you've got TikTokers who've got massive reach. You've got you know, on Substack for like Gen X people, like those have become the new fashion magazine, following these people who have seen before and making these really meaningful recommendations directly to their inbox. And so I think for brands, like how that looks in the future is it can vary massively, right? Like there's everything from sort of co-creation, you know, I think of the early days of like Nike ID, where you could put your initials and have like a choose the color of your swoosh or whatever, and we were like, wow, that's insane. Now to like what that looks like in the metaverse of people creating and crafting their own products or 3D printing them at home, right? You've got to kind of be comfortable with losing control slightly as a brand, but the idea of opening up your brand to your fans as co-creators, not just ambassadors or influencers or people who you're handing over things to and saying, yeah, here's the rules and say these words and click back here and we'll track that, is really exciting, but only if you're open-minded enough to be able to relinquish some of that control.
Yeah, I feel like those creators are really hyper aware of that as well and hyper aware of their power too. So they won't just take the affiliate link and kind of just crack on. They kind of want to be actual participants within the brands too.
Totally. And that's how the brands will grow and evolve. And, you know, brands need to listen to their audiences in order to know which direction to go in. And that dialogue is where it gets really interesting.
One of my final questions, and I don't know if anyone has, when people say, do you have any questions, it's going to be like pure silence. So if you do have a question, like, let me know. But one of my final questions is, who is like your voice of the culture? Who's someone that you feel like is a prominent voice within either your space or a space that is not within in the fashion world, someone that you kind of look towards, be like, I love what they have to say?
Yeah, I have a ton. So I won't go into all of them. Like I'm really into like brand strategy at the moment, and like there's a couple of women in that space that I think everyone should be listening to and subscribing to. Anna Angelic is kind of the goat. And her book, The Business of Aspiration, was like really, really important, meaningful kind of text that I refer back to all the time. There's a lady called Beth Bentley, who maybe not so many people have heard of at this point, who is like a British, not equivalent, but, operates in the same space of taking kind of like timeless marketing science, behavioral science, and applying it to how we shop for fashion. She has an incredible Substack called Pattern Recognition. So I would really encourage you, and it's totally free, to subscribe to that. And then, outside of like fashion, a couple more examples. So there's a guy called Neef, and he has just written this book called, oh my God, I can't remember what it's called now. He's written this incredible social history of rap and Where We Come From, it's called. I've got it on my bedside table. Where We Come From. It's an incredible social history of rap and grime music in the UK. I just went to see him speak at the South Bank Centre recently, and he just is such an amazing cultural storyteller of, contextualizing these moments or these lyrics within songs, and going to the towns in Birmingham where these artists came from, and sort of figuring out how we got here and where we're at now. So I would really recommend looking into that book as well. Maybe we can share all these on the list or something afterwards.
Yeah, exactly.
So people can see.
I mean, those were like all of my questions. If anyone does have any questions for Katy.
As you said, taste is incredibly subjective and nuanced. So with that in mind, what are some of the less obvious data points which go into the Lyst Index rankings?
I know, the secret sauce, hey? Less obvious or kind of... Okay, so, I mean, the demand side of it, I think is not so much less obvious, but there's a lot of different indications that we use. So everything from like, people searching for brand names, to interactions, to clicks, to like looking through galleries, to returning to wish listing. Wish listing is a really interesting one actually, because, it's not always that people can commit to buying these products, but more and more, a lot of people are putting things in that wish list to come back to. And that speaks to the way that people shop now, right? Which is that, maybe they're waiting for it to go on sale, but they also want to keep tab and tracks on things. So I'd say, yeah, wish listing is a good one. We do a lot of research at Lyst, like both on the kind of quantitative metrics that go into our analysis, but also qualitative, speaking to fashion shoppers, like at all different price points, all different markets, all different ages, looking for all sorts of different kinds of clothes. And increasingly we see these sort of unnamed problems. And one of them is people trying to kind of collect their inspiration. I don't know about you, but I have like, screenshots in my camera roll. I have, links in my notes app. I have WhatsApp groups where someone shared something, and people have all these fragmented points of inspiration, but they don't really know how to like keep them and then what to do with them often. And I think wish listing is a really good example of that, where we speak to customers all the time that might have a wish list across 6 different retailers with some of the same stuff in and some of the different stuff in. And it speaks to the fragmentation of the market, but also it's an interesting way of thinking about desire, that people might not necessarily be in a mindset to like pull the trigger and buy that thing, but they're thinking about those items early, and we factor that into the metric.
As it's the case for most industries, fashion is being transformed by digital sustainability, inclusion, and a number of other key pillars. How is Lyst embracing each of these? We often see those subjects discussed by the big players. You mentioned LVMH or Selfridges sometimes, but as an online retailer, how do you embrace this in terms of products, in terms of impact, etc.? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and it's a really hard question often for platform brands like Lyst or like a Spotify or like, someone that works with lots and lots of businesses under one umbrella. Because, as a platform, you do kind of have a responsibility in, literally platforming the brands and retailers that you work with. And we think about this a lot. Like our overarching kind of mission really, as a company, is to help customers make better decisions around fashion when they're shopping. We see our role as sort of choice architects. You know, we don't create the products. We don't operate in that inspiration space so much. But when people are looking to make those choices, that's where we can really play a role at helping guide and make meaningful recommendations to shoppers. And the first step of that is giving customers, shoppers, like the best access to the information they need to make the right choices. So when we're looking at the data quality and the different kinds of information that we ingest from our partner brands and retailers online, we look at the variety of different stuff that is there. And, you know, there are some retailers that are very transparent with the, countries of origin and the production and the fabrication and, and there are some that are less transparent in that. And there's a big job to be done, again, using AI often for us, in sort of aggregating and moderating and filtering through that information to be able to show the most important stuff to the customer so that the customer can then make the right decision in that moment, having all of the best, most accurate information that is available to them. So that's kind of what drives our decision making around, like, what do we show to people and how do we help the industry push forward? Because in the short term, it helps customers make that right decision in the moment. But in the long term, having better accurate information, having that better data about what decisions have been made drives a better, healthier future for the industry. Fashion, like, there's no surprise. Like, it's a huge problem. Like, we overproduce. It's the endemic returns is a huge pain point for the partners and the retailers that we work with. Like, it's not in a good way as an industry, but getting better access to information about what people do want and how people are shopping will help inform better decisions from the brands in the future about what they can produce and, how they should market and when. And so we see like a short-term win in helping the customer, but also a longer-term play in like helping drive a better future for the whole industry, really, as a platform. And that's something that only Lyst can do because of our, access and position working with all of these different brands across the space and not touching logistics, shipping, fulfillment, packaging, any of that. So we're able to advise and counsel in a way that is quite meaningful to a number of brands at the moment, which is really a privilege.
Hi, thank you. This is Begum. So you mentioned the importance of brand strategy and how traditional persona may not be working in today's world. What would you advise to a small brand on how to build strong personas if it doesn't necessarily have the budget for it or the historical data that will work on their behalf, and how to clearly define it's strongly branded, as you said, to the market?
Yeah, it's the hardest challenge ultimately. I would start with, what understanding do you have of your existing customers, and how can you look at that, whether it's kind of data driven or just anecdotal about where these people are and what we think we know about them, and what are you really solving for that shopper in that moment. And I think personas and whatever model you use to classify an audience within fashion, there's no perfect answer for this, by the way. There's things that work and things that don't work across all the different ways, whether you do it by psychographics or behavioral or style tribes or reasons for shopping and shopper journeys. But I think you've got to land on something that you can understand as a company, a business, who that person is and why your company is really useful for them. Why, and keep coming back to that idea. We for a long time used this sort of bullseye model that I think is really quite helpful in this, where you might have this core, a small group of super users or super fans or whatever who come back to your brand or your company again and again and again. Why? Who are those people and what can we do for them? And then you might have these sort of concentric circles outside where you've got more of these people, but actually they're not so clear and we don't do that same job for them. So trying to sort of relate back to what is it that unites these three circles, but also what are the differences and why they're coming to you?
Katie's time too.
Sorry, just very quickly.
No,
so
all good.
I've really enjoyed everything you've shared. I'm a brander myself, and I actually have two questions if I can.
Go for it.
So the first one is, you're obviously online. right? Do you do any sorts of like kind of face-to-face activations, for your audience? And the second one is when you began, right? Because obviously right now you're talking with, Ferragamo, Miu Miu, and like all of these amazing hot brands. How did you start approaching them?
Really good question. So, and the two kind of relate to each other actually, because in the early days of Lyst, or even in the early days when I was working at Net-a-Porter and Mr. Porter, it was a big ask to get these brands to want to come onto the platform. Still, like, not a huge proportion of sales is done through online for many of the luxury brands. And they've always been, especially some of the more established brands, like quite traditional in how the teams are structured, where you'd have like your, retail team here that's predominantly was about merchandising within the store or, distribution. And then you'd have like your marketing team here. And then you might have your media team here, but media doesn't talk to, online media. And there's like real silos across these organizations that were kind of challenging for us as a business to be like, where do we fit? And we were kind of in this gray zone, even with things like fashion shows. Like it was like, why would we invite Lyst to a show? Because are they press or are they a buyer or what are you? Where do you fit in that kind of mix? And so a big part of bringing brands onto that journey was like hand-to-hand combat, like going out and meeting these people and sitting with them and building that relationship over time. And going back to your first question about physical activations, we do, especially on the kind of B2B industry side, a lot of FaceTime, because I think it's really important in that sort of stakeholder building, really, to not only have people understand the business of what you're trying to do, but the people, the faces behind the team. It's been a long journey. So we have, very established relationship sales teams who ultimately were tasked with not only bringing these brands onto the platform, but maintaining that relationship and keeping those brands happy and understanding what it is that they're trying to do and feeding that back to the business. So I think that like, don't underestimate that like full court press. Like, you've got to keep going with it, and you've got to be quite targeted and say like, I'm going to get in front of these people. How do I get in that door? Maybe you start with this person and they refer you back to here, but sometimes you really need that FaceTime to build those connections for the first time. Because especially a business like Lyst that is online, and that has, operated as an affiliate model, often customers will come through the platform and they won't even know they've used Lyst, right? If they've clicked on a product in Google Shopping or, and we bring you into the platform, we send you off to transact on the retailer's website. That's kind of how it works, but it's not amazing for building a meaningful connection with the customer along the way in that sense. So how can we build that meaningful connection? It's got to be about meeting people where they are and trying to kind of, put ourselves in their face ultimately. And that takes time and it takes persistence and it takes doors getting shut in your face and, just turning up to things where people are going to be and introducing yourself and hustling for the intro and trying to get back there and following up and circling back and all of that stuff that's kind of like painful and a bit boring, but it pays off and you've got to just keep doing it and be memorable.
Yeah, I think there's so much to say around that face-to-face aspect, especially during being so digital, like post-COVID world where everything could be a Zoom meeting, which is great, but then also there's so much value in someone really seeing you and actually having a conversation, and there's just something that you just can't really express on a MacBook camera, and being in person face.
Totally.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the talk. I just had a quick question about, on Lyst there's 12,000 brands as advertised. How do you prevent customers from becoming overwhelmed when decision making?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's ultimately the problem we're trying to solve. And I think it's the problem the whole industry is trying to solve online right now, beyond just the Lyst thing, right? This choice paralysis. When you've got all of these options available to you, there's so much I could buy, like what should I buy? And so for us, like the choice and the supply, like those thousands, is ultimately the enabler to be able to show people the right things rather than the value in itself. I don't think anyone would be excited to go into a physical store where you've got a rail of 17,000 items to choose from if you're just looking for one thing. That being said, like if curation 1.0 doesn't always work or hasn't worked out so well for the industry either. And so I think for us, it's about finding that balance of, relevance and assortment. So having those right products within that mix, but also then it comes down to the product in terms of personalization, in terms of recommendations, in terms of, editorial, in terms of sort of guided shopping, to make sure that we hit you with the right balance of things that are right in that moment to be able to make the right choices. And that, honestly, like optimizing that experience to help customers find more of what it is that they're looking for is what our team obsess over every single day. That is core to what we do as a business. And I don't think anyone's fixed it yet, which is why, fashion is so often returned. And, we haven't nailed it. Like, how do we get it right every single time? And we shouldn't take away from the fact that some people love browsing. Browsing is great in fashion. Like, it's nice to click through. Like, there are, people who love the thrill of the hunt and, are proud of their skills in sourcing and identifying and filtering. Like, and, we see this stuff in the data all the time. Like, the specifics of the vocab from some seasoned online shoppers searching for specific things now. Like, the days of going to a platform like Lyst and searching like grey jumper are kind of behind most of us now, right? You know what you're going to get. People are searching by season, by product code, by, brand name. Like, people really know exactly what they want in this culture, I think, in this climate, having grown up with online shopping for a while now. And so we have a responsibility to those shoppers who are so well informed, so expert, to give them an experience that speaks to the skills that they already have and makes their lives not only kind of more easier, frictionless, seamless shopping, but still fun. Because ultimately that's what shopping for fashion should be fun.
Amen. Katy, thank you so much for this. We have a handful of other Voice of the Culture talks in the future. Our next one is at Soho House, White City, with Rob Bloom, who is the CMO of Aston Martin. So I'd love to see some of you there for the next one. And then to keep up to date, you can either be a Soho House member, you can keep up to date on the Soho House app, or you can go on the website cultureisdigital.com to find out more. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you.